He declined the call, not because he was busy, but because he believed nothing important ever came from an unknown number at 10:47 on a Tuesday night in Buckhead. 3 weeks later, Logan would stand in a hospital hallway listening to a child call him daddy without hesitation, and he would realize that ignoring that call had been the most expensive mistake of his life. And here's the part most people won't admit out loud. When you see a millionaire CEO reject an unknown number, you don't question it. You assume he's protecting his peace, guarding his time, managing his empire. That's what powerful men do, right? They filter, they screen, they decide what deserves access. But let me be honest with you. Sometimes what we call boundaries is just fear dressed up in a tailored suit. Logan didn't know that yet. All he knew was that his phone had buzzed twice against the marble countertop of his high-rise kitchen, the Atlanta skyline blinking behind him like a field of quiet stars. And he had pressed decline without thinking. Because men like him don't answer surprises. They schedule them. And that night, he believed he was in control. He was wrong. The phone buzzed again. Unknown number. This time, it didn't ring long. Just long enough to be noticed. Just long enough to be ignored. A minute later, a voicemail notification appeared. Logan stared at it while pouring himself a glass of bourbon. The ice cracked as it hit crystal. Outside his Buckhead windows, traffic crawled along Peachtree like red and white beads sliding through the night. Inside, everything felt controlled, quiet, designed. He almost deleted the voicemail. Almost. He tapped it out of boredom more than curiosity. A small voice filled the kitchen. Hi, my mommy says you're busy, but are you my dad? Silence. The ice melted. The skyline didn't move, but something inside Logan did. The word landed heavy. Dad. Not Mr. Logan. Not, sir. Not excuse me. Dad. He didn't breathe for a second. Not because he believed it. Not because he understood it. But because some words don't ask permission before they rearrange a room. Then the voicemail continued. A faint cough. Soft. Fragile. And somewhere behind that little voice, a distant rhythmic beep. Slow. Mechanical. Clinical. Hospital. Mini-climax number 1 was the word. Mini-climax number 2 was the sound. And now there was no bourbon strong enough to make this feel small. Some stories don't start with fireworks. They start with a voicemail you almost deleted. Now here's something I want you to think about. Have you ever ignored a call that changed your life? Have you ever walked away from something you didn't understand, only to find out it was yours? What would you do if your past didn't just knock on the door, but called you by name? Because 3 years ago, Logan had dated a woman named Doris. Not long. Long enough to remember her laugh. Long enough to remember the way she'd teased him about working too much. Long enough to remember choosing a venture capital meeting over dinner one night and never fully recovering from the look on her face. And then she was gone. No drama, no courtroom shouting, no scene, just distance, a changed number. A quiet ending he told himself was mutual. He assumed it ended cleanly. He never knew she was pregnant. So now the question wasn't just emotional, it was practical. Was this real? Was this manipulation? Or was there a 3-year-old child somewhere in Atlanta who had just used a word Logan never prepared to carry? Dad, tell me in the comments, would you call back or pretend you never heard it? Because pretending is easy when your life is polished. Pretending is easy when you live 30 floors above the street and the city looks small from your balcony. But reality has a way of taking the elevator up. So now let me ask you something. If the one word you never prepared for suddenly belonged to you, would you run toward it or run away? If you're still watching, hit that like button so YouTube knows this story matters. No, let's slow this down, because this isn't just a story about a rich man and a phone call. This is about responsibility and timing, and what happens when success grows faster than your character. Logan didn't rush to call back. He replayed the voicemail. Once, twice, a third time, just to make sure he hadn't imagined the cough. The hesitation in that tiny voice. The way the word dad sounded both hopeful and unsure, like it didn't know if it had permission to exist yet. He walked to the window. Atlanta stretched beneath him, the Bank of America tower glowing red, traffic sliding down the connector, somewhere far off the faint rumble of a late-night motorcycle cutting through Midtown. 30 floors up, life looked manageable. 30 floors up, consequences looked distant. But here's the high-retention truth nobody talks about. Money can insulate you from discomfort. It cannot insulate you from blood. And somewhere in this same city, maybe 10 miles away, maybe less, a child had just attached his name to her identity. Not as a rumor, not as a possibility, but as a question. And questions are dangerous, because once they're asked, they demand an answer. Logan picked up his phone, hovered over the number, stopped. His jaw tightened. He told himself he needed facts first. Proof, context, adults. He told himself this could be a mistake, a scam, a coincidence. But deep down, and I want you to hear this, deep down there was something else. Recognition, not of the voice, of the weight. That subtle shift in a man's chest when life hands him something permanent. He didn't call back that night. He went to bed instead. But sleep didn't come easy, because every time he closed his eyes, he heard it again. Are you my dad? And that question doesn't disappear just because you silence your phone. Here's the part nobody prepares you for. Fatherhood doesn't always arrive with a birth announcement. Sometimes it arrives with guilt. Sometimes it arrives late. And sometimes it arrives in a voice small enough to break a man who thought he was unbreakable. Logan lay in his king-sized bed that night, staring at the ceiling of a room designed by professionals who understood lighting better than they understood love. The city hummed beyond the glass. A distant siren drifted through Buckhead. Somewhere below, valet drivers laughed outside a late-night steakhouse. His life was orderly, predictable, profitable. He had built it that way. But now there was a crack in the structure. Not loud, not dramatic, just a thin line running through everything he thought he controlled. Because the truth is this, success teaches you how to win meetings. It doesn't teach you how to answer a child. And whether he liked it or not, that voicemail had introduced a new title into his life. Not CEO, not founder, not investor, Dad. Now let me be real with you for a moment. Most men aren't afraid of responsibility. They're afraid of failing at it. And Logan had spent his entire adult life making sure he never looked unprepared. But you can't rehearse being somebody's father. You either show up or you don't. And that choice, it changes more than one life. Because this story isn't about whether the child is his. It's about whether he will become the man she needs him to be. And before we go any further, let's ground this. Because this story is not about headlines. It's about heart. Welcome back to Mr. Dave Stories, where every story reminds us that growth is possible, healing is real, and lessons are everywhere. If this is your first time, here, we're honored to have you. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you never miss a story that might uplift, inspire, or change the way you see life. Now let me say something gently. If you've ever had a moment in your life where a single decision carried more weight than you expected, stay with me. If you've ever wondered whether it's too late to fix something that mattered, stay with me. And if you believe that redemption isn't about perfection, it's about showing up when it counts, then this story is for you. Because what Logan does next will test more than his bank account. It will test his pride, his past, and the version of himself he thought was finished growing. So, take a breath with me. We're just getting started. And trust me, that voicemail, it was only the beginning. Northwest Atlanta didn't glow the way Buckhead did. It breathed. Slower streets, older trees, front porches that held conversations long after the sun dipped behind the houses. The air carried the scent of fried food from somewhere down the block, and on certain nights you could hear a radio playing gospel through an open window like it was seasoning the whole neighborhood. Inside a modest second-floor apartment, collard greens simmered low on the stove. Doris stood barefoot in the kitchen, wooden spoon in hand, stirring slow circles like she was trying to calm something deeper than the pot. Steam rose and fogged the cabinet above her. A gospel station played softly from her phone propped against the backsplash, a choir harmonizing about grace and second chances. In the living room, Agnes lay curled on the couch beneath a bright yellow blanket covered in cartoon sunflowers. She coughed, not loud, just enough to make Doris pause mid-stir. "You okay, baby?" she called gently. Agnes nodded without lifting her head. "Yes, Mommy." Her voice was small but brave, the way 3-year-olds try to be when they don't want to worry the person they love most. The coffee table in front of her held a stack of hospital paperwork. White pages with official stamps, numbers circled in blue pen, insurance information left blank. Doris glanced at it again. 3 years. 3 whole years she had carried the weight alone. And if you're wondering whether that was easy, it wasn't. But it was simple. Georgia law had been clear from the beginning. She wasn't married when Agnes was born. That meant full custody defaulted to her. No court fight, no shared schedule, no back and forth. Just her. And she had built their life around that certainty. Daycare drop-offs, doctor appointments, Saturday mornings with pancakes and syrup sticky on little fingers, Sunday church where the older women would pinch Agnes's cheeks and say, "That baby got a bright spirit." Doris had memorized every inch of motherhood the hard way, but this week had been different. Earlier that Monday, Agnes had found an old photo tucked into the back of Doris's dresser drawer. A picture taken years ago, Logan standing beside Doris at Piedmont Park, both laughing at something off camera. Logan's arm resting lightly around her waist, not possessive, just present. "Who's that?" Agnes had asked. Doris had frozen. Because children don't ask casual questions about identity. They ask from instinct. That's a friend, Doris had started. Agnes studied the photo harder. "He looks like me." 3-year-olds don't miss much. That night, Doris sat beside her daughter on the bed and chose honesty over comfort. "His name is Logan," she had said softly. "He's your father." Agnes blinked, thought about it, then asked the question Doris had feared for 3 years. Where he at? And here's something most people won't admit. Protecting your child can sometimes look a lot like controlling the narrative. Doris hadn't told Logan about the pregnancy. Not at first. When she found out, they had already stopped speaking. Pride had hardened both sides. He was expanding his company. Traveling. Posting photos online from investor events and private dinners. She had watched from a distance and told herself she didn't need a man who chose conference calls over connection. Then Agnes was born, and motherhood arrived fierce. Late nights, early mornings, bills stacked beside bottles, help from neighbors when daycare closed unexpectedly. Doris learned quickly that survival doesn't leave room for regret, but it does leave room for fear. She feared his money, feared that if she told him, he would sweep into court with lawyers and polished arguments and take control, feared that her modest apartment wouldn't look impressive compared to a high-rise view, feared that stability, the thing Georgia courts claimed to value most, would suddenly be measured in square footage instead of love. So she stayed quiet. She saved his number in her phone. Never blocked it, never deleted it, just held it, like something sharp wrapped in tissue. This week, though, the coughing had started. Agnes's fever had crept higher than Doris liked. The urgent care visit turned into a hospital check. Nothing dramatic, just monitoring, tests, waiting. Waiting costs money. The nurse had handed Doris the paperwork earlier that afternoon. "We'll need insurance information." Doris had swallowed. She worked. She provided. But hospital bills don't care about pride. And that's when she opened her contacts. Logan. Her thumb hovered for a long time before pressing call. He didn't answer. She told herself that was fine. She left a voicemail instead. She didn't want to beg, didn't want to accuse, so she handed the phone to Agnes. Because sometimes the truth sounds stronger when it isn't filtered by adult pain. Back in the present, Doris turned off the stove and wiped her hands on a dish towel. She walked into the living room and sat on the edge of the couch. Agnes's eyes were open now. "Mommy." "Yes, baby." "Did he hear me?" Doris brushed a curl from her daughter's forehead. "I don't know yet." Agnes considered that. Then, with innocent logic, she said, "If he my daddy, he gone call back." Doris felt that sentence settle in her chest. Children believe in return calls. Adults believe in patterns. And Logan's pattern had once been distance. Pause for a second. What would you have done in Doris's place? Would you protect your peace? Or would you risk it for your child's future? A knock sounded at the door. Not dramatic, just 2 firm taps. Doris opened it to see the nurse from earlier, holding a clipboard. "We're updating files," the nurse said gently. "We need insurance information." Doris glanced back at Agnes, then at the paperwork on the table, then at the phone resting silent beside it. And for the first time in 3 years, she hoped Logan wouldn't ignore an unknown number twice. Logan did not sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling while the voicemail replayed in his mind without permission. The city noise faded sometime after midnight, but the questions stayed awake. "Are you my dad?" By 6:12 a.m., He was dressed, not in a boardroom suit, in jeans, a navy sweater, the kind of outfit that said casual but still intentional. He stood in his kitchen again, phone in hand, staring at the unknown number. The Atlanta morning light spilled across the marble counters. News headlines scrolled silently on the television mounted near the fridge. Markets opening, tech stocks shifting, global meetings already underway. His assistant had texted him about a 9:30 strategy session. He typed back 3 words: reschedule, personal matter. That alone told him something had shifted. Logan pressed call. It rang. No answer. He didn't leave a message this time. Instead, he grabbed his keys. The elevator ride down from the 31st floor felt longer than usual. Mirrors reflected a man who built an empire before he built a family. He adjusted his cuff without realizing it, a nervous habit he hadn't felt in years. Outside, Buckhead was waking up. Joggers moved past glass towers. A woman walked a golden retriever in front of a gated condominium entrance. Delivery trucks double-parked near upscale cafes serving espresso that cost more than a fast food meal. His SUV unlocked with a quiet chirp. Leather seats, clean dashboard, navigation screen glowing. He sat there for a moment before starting the engine. The address he had traced from the voicemail area code wasn't exact, but it narrowed things down to Northwest Atlanta, a part of the city he didn't visit often unless business required it. The engine started. He pulled onto Peachtree. Morning traffic gathered quickly. The skyline shifted in his rearview mirror as he merged toward Midtown. MARTA trains rattled along elevated tracks to his right, silver cars cutting across concrete like quiet reminders that the city ran on more than corner offices. As he drove south, the architecture changed. Glass towers thinned, brick buildings grew older, murals began appearing on walls, bold colors, community faces, raised fists, jazz legends painted larger than life, barbershops with hand-lettered signs, churches with marquees announcing fish fries and youth choir rehearsals. The city didn't shrink. It textured. Logan gripped the steering wheel tighter. He remembered Doris laughing in Piedmont Park. Remembered her teasing him for answering emails during a picnic. She had once said, "You don't know how to sit still, Logan." He had smiled back then, confident, driven. He chose ambition over patience, chose expansion over explanation. He told himself she understood. Maybe she did. Maybe she didn't. He passed under the MARTA tracks again. A bus rolled by with an advertisement for a local college. 2 kids in school uniforms crossed the street holding hands, backpacks bouncing. If this child was his, Agnes, she would be about that age soon. The thought hit differently in daylight. He wasn't driving toward a problem. He was driving toward possibility. The GPS guided him into a quieter neighborhood, lined with older trees and modest apartment buildings. Lawns were small but tended. A man watered his front steps with a hose. A woman swept her porch while talking on speakerphone. Life here felt closer to the ground. Logan slowed his SUV and parked along the curb near a 2-story brick building with balconies trimmed in black metal. He turned off the engine. Silence settled inside the vehicle. For a moment, he just sat there. He could still leave. He could request a DNA test through legal channels. He could protect himself before risking anything emotional. But something about the voicemail, the hospital beep, the cough, didn't feel like a negotiation. It felt urgent. He stepped out of the car. The morning air carried the scent of something cooking, maybe bacon from a neighboring unit. Somewhere down the street, music played softly, a blend of hip-hop rhythm and morning radio commentary. He walked toward the entrance. Each step felt heavier than the last. He reached the door. Stopped. He hadn't called ahead, hadn't prepared what to say. What do you say when you might be meeting your child for the first time? He raised his hand to knock, lowered it. He adjusted his sweater sleeve again. Inside, faint movement echoed through the hallway. A door opened somewhere above. Footsteps hurried down the stairs. Before he could gather himself, the apartment door at the end of the walkway swung open. A small figure darted out, curly hair bouncing, yellow blanket trailing from one shoulder like a cape she forgot to remove. "Mommy, is he?" The little girl stopped mid-sentence when she saw him. Her eyes widened, not confused, certain. She took 3 fast steps toward him before Doris's voice called from behind her. "Agnes, wait." Too late. The child stood in front of Logan, looking up without hesitation. "You came," she said softly. He couldn't move. couldn't speak. Her face searched his features the way children do, comparing noses, eyes, skin tone, searching for recognition in bone structure. Then she smiled. Not cautiously, not shy, just open. Daddy. The word didn't ask permission this time. It claimed space. Logan felt the world tilt slightly, not violently, just enough to remind him he was standing at the edge of something irreversible. Behind Agnes, Doris stepped into view. She wore jeans and a loose sweater, no makeup, hair pulled back. Her expression wasn't anger. It was guarded strength. 3 years of it. Logan opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Agnes didn't wait. She reached forward and grabbed his hand like it had always belonged there. Her fingers were small, warm, certain, and in that moment, every legal strategy, every rehearsed sentence, every protective instinct dissolved into something simpler. Reality. Sometimes the truth doesn't knock. It runs straight toward you. Agnes's hand was still in his. Small, warm, trusting. Logan hadn't moved yet. He was aware of Doris watching him, aware of the way her shoulders squared slightly as if she were bracing for something he hadn't said. He finally looked down at Agnes. "Hey," he managed softly. Her grip tightened. "You tall." A nervous breath escaped him, almost a laugh. "I've been told." Behind her, Doris stepped forward. "Agnes, baby, go sit inside for a minute." Agnes hesitated, then nodded. She released Logan's hand without fear and walked back into the apartment, dragging the yellow blanket behind her. The door remained open. Doris didn't invite him in. Not yet. They stood facing each other in the narrow walkway outside the apartment. 3 years sat between them. "You look the same," Logan said, immediately realizing how small that sounded. "I don't," Doris replied calmly. "I'm a mother now." That landed. He nodded. "Why didn't you tell me?" Her jaw tightened, not in anger but in restraint. "We're not doing that first." He exhaled slowly. "Then what are we doing?" "We're doing this the right way." There was no hostility in her voice, just clarity. "I need a paternity test." The words were firm, not cruel, not emotional, measured. Logan blinked once. "You think I'd show up here and—" "I think," Doris interrupted gently, "that if we're going to change Agnes's life, we're going to do it legally, properly, with paperwork, with clarity." He felt a flicker of offense rise in his chest. "You don't believe me?" "I believe in protection," she answered. Silence stretched between them. Down the block, a car radio played faint bass. Somewhere nearby, a screen door slammed. Logan straightened slightly. "You called me." "You handed her the phone." "Yes." "So why question it now?" "Because once your name goes on anything official," she said quietly, "this isn't just emotional anymore. It's legal." He studied her face. She wasn't doubting him. She was guarding her daughter. And here's the part most men struggle with. Protection can feel like accusation when you're not used to being questioned. "I don't need a test to know what I heard," Logan said. "I do," Doris replied. He let that settle. Georgia law wasn't vague about this. He knew enough from business circles to understand basic family statutes. Since they weren't married when Agnes was born, Doris had full legal and physical custody automatically. He had no parental rights until paternity was established formally, and even then, legitimation would be required through the court before he could request custody or visitation. A biological connection didn't equal authority. It equaled responsibility. "I'd have to legitimate," he said, almost thinking out loud. Doris nodded once. "Exactly. You've looked into this." "Of course I have." He felt something shift, not resentment, respect. "You think I'd try to take her?" he asked quietly. "I think you have resources," Doris replied. "I think you have lawyers. I think you live in a building taller than most people's hope. So yes, I've thought about what that could mean." Her honesty was steady, not dramatic. "And you think I'd use that against you?" "I don't know what you'd do," she said. "That's why we're not guessing." He ran a hand through his hair. The instinct to assert himself rose quickly, the boardroom reflex. The urge to say, "I can handle this." The urge to lead. But this wasn't a merger. This was a child. If you've ever had to prove yourself, you understand this moment. Because Logan had spent his entire career proving things. Proving vision, proving projections, proving worth to investors who didn't believe at first. And now, standing in front of Doris, he realized something uncomfortable. For the first time in years, he wasn't the one with leverage. He was the one asking for access. "When do we do it?" he asked finally. Doris's shoulders relaxed a fraction. "I already scheduled an appointment. This afternoon." He almost smiled. "You planned this?" "I've been planning since Monday." He nodded slowly. "Okay." Just that. No argument. No legal threats. No ego. Doris studied him carefully, as if waiting for the other shoe to drop. "It didn't, okay?" she repeated. "I'll take the test." She exhaled softly. They stood there in a different kind of silence now, not tension, but transition. Agnes peeked from behind the doorway. "Y'all done talking?" Doris glanced back. "Almost." Logan crouched slightly to meet Agnes's eyes. "Hey," he said gently. "We're just making sure we do things the right way." Agnes nodded like that made perfect sense. Because children trust structure more than adults realize. Later that afternoon, they stood inside a quiet clinic office. No drama, no spectacle, just forms and signatures and a professional process. The paperwork slid across the desk toward Logan. He read every line. Acknowledgement of paternity testing, consent, verification. His name looked different printed beside hers. Logan, potential father. He picked up the pen, paused for half a second, not from doubt, from understanding. Once signed, this would move forward officially. No more hovering in uncertainty. No more pretending this was abstract. He signed. The ink dried quickly. And just like that, emotion became evidence. The waiting did something to Logan that boardrooms never could. It stripped him of control. 3 days passed between the test and the results. 3 ordinary Atlanta days filled with traffic on the connector, coffee meetings in Midtown, and investors asking about quarterly projections. On the surface, nothing changed. Underneath, everything shifted. He went back to work the morning after the test as if routine could steady him. His office sat high above the city. Glass walls, polished desk, awards mounted with quiet precision. Assistants moved efficiently. Screens displayed market data in green and red. Logan nodded through conversations. Approved budgets, corrected language in a presentation. But in the pauses between sentences, he heard it again. "Are you my dad?" He didn't tell anyone. Not yet. There's something about potential fatherhood that makes a man cautious. Not ashamed, just careful. Because once spoken aloud, it becomes real in a different way. On the 3rd morning, he sat at the head of a long conference table. 12 chairs. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown. A strategy meeting in progress. Graphs glowed on the screen behind him. A board member was mid-sentence about expansion into Austin. Logan's phone, face down beside his tablet, vibrated. Once, he ignored it. It vibrated again. He glanced at the screen. Clinic. His heartbeat shifted. He raised a hand slightly, signaling the room to pause. "Give me a moment." The room quieted. Executives exchanged subtle glances. Logan rarely interrupted meetings for personal matters. He picked up the phone. "Hello?" A professional voice confirmed his identity and delivered the result plainly. DNA probability, 99.99%. Biological father confirmed. There was no dramatic swell, no cinematic music, just a fact, a percentage. Numbers were supposed to comfort him. They didn't. For a moment, he forgot he was standing. He stared out at the skyline while the voice on the other end explained the next steps. Official documentation, timelines, certified copies available upon request. He barely heard it. "Thank you," he said quietly. The call ended. He stood there longer than necessary. The city stretched before him. Familiar buildings, steady movement, predictable flow. But now the view looked different. It wasn't just his city anymore. It was hers. His daughter's. He turned slowly back toward the table. 12 faces watching, waiting. He didn't sit down immediately. He placed both hands on the back of his chair and inhaled once. "I just received confirmation," he said, voice measured but softer than usual. "I have a daughter." Silence. No one spoke, because even in corporate spaces, some statements don't invite analysis. They demand respect. One of the executives cleared his throat gently. "Congratulations." Logan nodded once. The word felt strange. Congratulations, as if this had been planned, as if it were a promotion. But this wasn't advancement. It was expansion of responsibility. He sat down slowly. "We'll continue," he said, though his focus had shifted entirely. The meeting moved forward, but Logan's mind did not. Denial had quietly exited the room. In its place stood responsibility. He had told himself earlier that he needed proof before feeling anything. Now he had it. And the proof didn't make things easier. It made them heavier, because now there was no emotional escape hatch, no rational dismissal. Agnes wasn't a possibility. She was his. After the meeting ended, Logan remained seated while others filed out. His assistant lingered near the doorway. "Everything okay?" she asked carefully. He nodded. "Yes. I'll be out in a minute." When the room emptied, he leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling for a brief moment. 3 years. 3 birthdays missed. 3 Christmas mornings he hadn't known existed. The guilt didn't arrive loud. It arrived quiet, in images. A toddler learning to walk. First words spoken. Doctor visits. School forms listing only one parent. He exhaled slowly. This wasn't about regret. Regret can become self-centered quickly. This was about action. He picked up his phone, scrolled to Doris's number, paused. The instinct to rush, to solve, to assert structure, it flickered again. He checked himself. This wasn't a negotiation. This was KO parenting. He typed carefully. "We need to talk about her future." He read it once. No blame, no accusation, no demand. Just forward motion. He pressed send. The message delivered. A few minutes passed before 3 dots appeared. Then disappeared. Then reappeared. Finally, her response came. "When?" Simple. Direct. He felt something settle inside him. Not comfort. Direction. "Tonight," he replied. "Wherever you're comfortable." He didn't add anything else. Because for the first time in a long time, Logan understood something deeply personal. Power isn't about control. It's about restraint. He stood up from the table and walked toward the window again. Below him, Atlanta moved like it always had. But somewhere in northwest Atlanta, a 3-year-old girl with a yellow blanket now had confirmed proof that the man she called Daddy wasn't guessing. He was hers. And now the question wasn't whether he was her father. It was whether he would be present. The shift from denial to responsibility is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It simply demands you stand up differently. And Logan was beginning to feel the weight of that posture change. That evening, Doris did not light candles. She did not change clothes twice. She did not rehearse speeches in the mirror. She sat at her small kitchen table with the legal aid pamphlet open in front of her, and Agnes coloring quietly beside her with a box of worn crayons. Logan's message still sat at the top of her phone screen. We need to talk about her future. Future. That word can feel hopeful. It can also feel threatening. Doris had spent 3 years building a stable rhythm for Agnes. Morning routines, daycare pickup times, Sunday dinners with neighbors bringing sweet tea and cornbread. A life measured not by luxury, but by consistency. Consistency is powerful in Georgia custody law. She had learned that much. Earlier that afternoon, after receiving confirmation from the clinic that Logan was indeed the biological father, she had walked into a modest legal aid office near downtown. No marble floors, no polished suits, just folding chairs, bulletin boards with community resources, and a quiet sense of practicality. An unnamed clerk had greeted her with a clipboard. "I need information about legitimation," Doris had said calmly. The clerk nodded. "If he wants rights, he'll have to petition the court. Paternity alone doesn't grant custody or visitation. Until legitimation is granted, you retain sole legal and physical custody." Doris had known that part already, but hearing it spoken aloud steadied her. "And if he petitions?" she asked. "Then the court evaluates best interest," the clerk replied. "Stability, living environment, each parent's involvement, willingness to foster the child's relationship with the other parent. Judges look at behavior, not bank accounts." That last sentence lingered. Judges look at behavior, not bank accounts. Doris thanked the clerk and walked back to her car feeling both empowered and unsettled, because even with legal grounding, fear doesn't vanish easily. Now, sitting at her kitchen table, she watched Agnes color a picture of 3 stick figures holding hands. One tall, one medium, one small. "Who's that?" Doris asked gently. Agnes held it up proudly. "That's us." Doris studied the drawing. 3 figures, no space between them. Her chest tightened slightly. There was a knock at the door. Not urgent, just present. Logan stood outside again when she opened it. This time, he didn't look stunned. He looked deliberate. "Can we talk?" he asked. She stepped aside. He entered the apartment slowly, glancing around as if memorizing it. The couch, the small bookshelf, the scent of collard greens lingering from earlier, the faint gospel melody still playing from the radio. Agnes ran up to him without hesitation. "You came back," she said. "I said I would," he answered softly. "Consistency. Children notice it." Doris cleared her throat gently. "Agnes, baby, go wash your hands for dinner." Agnes nodded and disappeared down the hallway. Logan turned toward Doris. "I got the results." "I did too." He inhaled once. "It's confirmed." "Yes." They stood in that shared acknowledgement for a moment. Then Logan spoke carefully. "I want to be involved. Fully. School, healthcare, decisions. I can provide private education if that's what she needs. Insurance, a trust, stability." Doris's shoulders stiffened. There it was. Resources, solutions, structure. She folded her arms loosely, not defensive but guarded. "She already has stability," Doris said. "I'm not saying she doesn't. It sounds like you are." He paused. That wasn't what he meant. But meaning and impact are different things. "I'm saying I can contribute." "Contribute," she repeated quietly. In her ears, the word translated differently. "Control. What exactly are you asking for?" She said. "I'm going to file for legitimation," he replied. "That gives me legal standing. After that, we can work out a parenting plan." She nodded slowly. "And if the court decides differently?" "It won't," he said quickly. "I'm not trying to take her away from you." Intentions change when lawyers start talking. The tension sharpened slightly, not explosive, focused. Logan stepped closer but kept distance respectful. "I'm not your enemy." "I don't know that yet," Doris answered. Silence. The gospel music shifted into a softer hymn. Logan lowered his voice. "I don't want to fight you. I want to raise her with you." Doris studied his face carefully, searching for ego. She found something else. Fear, not fear of losing control. Fear of losing access. "She's used to me," Doris said. "Her routines, her school, her doctors. Georgia courts care about continuity. I know. And they also care about which parent encourages a relationship with the other," she added quietly. That landed, because both of them knew that withholding could backfire legally. Logan nodded slowly. "I'm not here to damage that." "Then don't," she replied. Agnes's small footsteps echoed down the hallway. She stopped near the kitchen entrance, unnoticed at first. Logan continued carefully. "I can pay for better schools. She likes her preschool. I can cover all medical expenses. She already has care. I can give her opportunities. She already has love." The words hung between them. Opportunity versus presence. Provision versus protection. Two valid instincts colliding. When adults fight for control, who's really holding the child? The question didn't need an answer yet. Because just beyond the doorway, Agnes stood listening quietly. She wasn't afraid. She was confused. And confusion has a way of echoing long after arguments end. Doris noticed her first. "Agnes?" she said gently. The little girl stepped forward slowly, holding the drawing from earlier. "Y'all mad?" she asked. The room softened immediately. Logan crouched down to her level. "No," he said carefully. "We're just figuring things out." Agnes looked between them. "Don't fight," she whispered. Doris felt her resolve shift slightly. Because whatever custody plan they built, whatever paperwork they signed, whatever court reviewed their choices, Agnes would feel the temperature of every conversation, and that temperature mattered more than pride. The tension didn't disappear, but it changed shape, and both parents understood something silently in that moment. This wasn't about winning. It was about not losing her trust. Saturday arrived warmer than expected. Atlanta humidity had begun settling into late spring, the kind that made sidewalks shimmer slightly by noon. Logan stood inside his Buckhead condo, adjusting the thermostat for the third time in 10 minutes. He had never prepared a space for a child before. His living room was clean to the point of sterility. Low-gray sectional, glass coffee table, framed abstract art that meant something to investors but nothing to toddlers. The kitchen counters held nothing but a fruit bowl and a sleek espresso machine. No toys, no cartoons playing, no evidence of childhood. He walked to the window out of habit, then stopped himself. No more symbolic staring. This wasn't about reflection anymore. This was about presence. A knock sounded at the door. Not rushed, just punctual. Logan inhaled once and opened it. Doris stood there with Agnes holding her hand, wearing denim overalls and pink sneakers that blinked faintly when she stepped. Agnes looked up at him and grinned. "You live high," she said immediately. He smiled despite himself. "Yeah, I guess I do." Doris met his eyes briefly. "Just the afternoon," she said. "Call me if she needs anything." "I will." There was no hostility in the exchange, just caution. Agnes hugged Doris quickly, then walked inside without hesitation. The door closed, and suddenly Logan's condo felt different. Bigger, quieter. Agnes walked straight to the window. "Wow," she whispered, pressing her palms to the glass. "The cars look tiny." He crouched beside her. "They do." She turned to him suddenly. "You scared of heights?" He chuckled softly. "No, I am," she announced, then leaned closer to the glass anyway. Children are brave in small contradictions. Logan stood and scanned his own home through her eyes. Minimalist, sharp edges, nothing soft. "You hungry?" he asked. Agnes nodded enthusiastically. Yes, he had anticipated this, or at least thought he had. "I ordered lunch," he said confidently. The doorbell rang moments later. He tipped the delivery driver and carried neatly packaged containers to the kitchen island. Grilled salmon, steamed vegetables, garlic rice. He plated a small portion carefully and placed it in front of Agnes. She stared at it, then looked up at him. "Where's the fries?" He blinked once. "I didn't order fries." She poked the broccoli gently. "This green tree's spicy." He tried not to laugh. "It's just broccoli." She pushed the plate slightly. "I want cornbread." He paused. "Cornbread." Of course. His kitchen held imported olive oil and Himalayan salt. It did not hold cornbread. "We can order something else," he offered quickly. She crossed her arms in tiny defiance. "Mommy, make cornbread." There it was. Comparison, not intentional, just instinctive. He leaned back slightly, thinking. "Okay," he said finally. "Let's try again." He pulled out his phone and searched for a nearby southern restaurant. 10 minutes later, he was placing another order, this time including fried chicken, mac and cheese, and yes, cornbread. Agnes brightened instantly. When the second meal arrived, she clapped softly at the sight of it. He watched her eat, carefully, messily, with joy. There was something humbling about realizing success doesn't automatically translate into knowing what your child likes for lunch. After eating, she wandered into the living room. "Where are your toys?" she asked casually. He paused. "I don't have toys." She studied him. "That's sad." He laughed quietly. Maybe it was. She climbed onto the couch and began bouncing lightly. "Don't fall," he said automatically. "I won't." He sat beside her. An awkward tenderness filled the space between them. Not uncomfortable, just new. He didn't know whether to initiate conversation or let her lead. She solved it for him. "Why you wasn't there before?" The question landed softly but directly. Not accusatory, just curious. He felt his chest tighten slightly. There it was. Not the legal tension. Not the financial discussion. The emotional core. He didn't rush to answer. Because children deserve honesty, not performance. "I didn't know," he said gently. She tilted her head. "You didn't know me?" "No." "Why?" He swallowed carefully. "Because grown-ups sometimes make mistakes," he said slowly. "And sometimes they don't talk when they should." She considered that, then nodded once, satisfied for now. Children accept incomplete explanations if the tone feels safe. She leaned against him casually, as if that settled it. He froze slightly at first, then allowed it. Her weight was light, trusting. He stared ahead at his clean, structured living room that now felt slightly rearranged just by her presence. The city skyline glittered beyond the glass, but it no longer felt like the focus of the room. Agnes yawned softly. "You coming next week too?" she asked. "Yes," he answered without hesitation, and for the first time since the voicemail, he didn't feel like he was reacting. He felt like he was building. But in the quiet of that moment, he understood something clearly. Provision is easy. Consistency is earned. When Logan closed the door behind Agnes that afternoon, Doris did not go back upstairs immediately. She sat in her car for a full minute with the engine off, hands resting on the steering wheel, breathing steady. The parking lot was quiet except for a distant lawnmower humming somewhere down the block. A neighbor walked past carrying grocery bags and nodded politely. "Baby with her daddy?" the neighbor asked casually. "For a few hours," Doris replied. The word daddy still felt new on her tongue when applied to Logan. She drove home slowly. The apartment felt larger without Agnes's energy inside it. No crayons scattered across the coffee table. No cartoon theme songs floating through the hallway. Just quiet. Too much of it. She walked to the kitchen and instinctively reached for the pot of collard greens from earlier in the week, though she wasn't hungry. Cooking had always grounded her. Stirring something on the stove gave her hands something to do when her thoughts moved too fast. But today the pot stayed cold. Instead, she sat at the small dining table and stared at the empty booster seat pushed neatly beneath it. 3 hours. That's all it was. And yet her chest felt tight in a way she hadn't prepared for. Most people assume strength means independence. But strength also means learning how to share. And sharing a child after 3 years of doing everything alone, that's not weakness, that's adjustment. Her phone buzzed. A message from one of the church mothers. "How you holding up, baby?" Doris smiled faintly. She had mentioned the situation in confidence earlier in the week during Bible study. Word traveled gently in those circles, not as gossip, but as care. "I'm okay," she typed back. Seconds later, the phone rang. She answered. "You don't sound okay," came the warm voice on the other end. Doris leaned back in her chair. It's strange. She's never stayed anywhere without me. That's natural. I know." "You trust him?" The question lingered. Doris stared at the wall for a moment. "I trust that he wants to do right," she said carefully. "I don't know if he knows how." The church mother hummed thoughtfully. "Men learn fatherhood slower than we learn motherhood. But if he's showing up, that counts." Doris nodded, even though the other woman couldn't see her. "Just don't let pride make decisions for you," the voice added gently. "And don't let fear make them either." After the call ended, Doris sat in silence again. Fear, that word sat closer to the truth than she liked. She had told herself for 3 years that silence was protection, that keeping Agnes's world small and stable was the safest route. But now that Logan was present, she had to admit something uncomfortable. Part of her had been afraid of him not wanting them, and part of her had been afraid of him wanting them too much. She rose from the table and walked into her bedroom. At the back of her closet, tucked in a box she hadn't opened in years, were old photos. She pulled one out, the same picture Agnes had found earlier in the week. Piedmont Park, sunlight on Logan's face, his arm around her waist. She remembered that day clearly now. He had brought takeout from a food truck and spilled sweet tea, laughing because the lid wasn't secure. She had teased him about being too polished for paper cups. He had looked at her like she slowed his world down in a way he didn't admit he needed. The breakup hadn't been explosive. It had been quiet. A missed call. An argument about priorities. Her telling him she wouldn't compete with conference calls forever. His silence afterward. She told herself he chose work. He told himself she walked away. 2 versions of the same ending. She sat on the edge of her bed holding the photo. And here's the part she hadn't spoken aloud. Not to the church mothers, not to herself in the mirror. She still loved him. Not in the reckless way of 20-something romance. Not in the desperate way of needing validation, but in the quiet recognition that some connections don't disappear just because life reroutes them. She closed her eyes for a moment, then quickly shook the thought away. This wasn't about her feelings. This was about Agnes. Her phone buzzed again. A notification from her banking app. She frowned slightly and opened it. Deposit received. Amount substantial. More than a few medical bills. More than she had asked for. No message attached. Just a transfer from Logan. Her chest tightened instantly. Not relief. Not gratitude. Something sharper. Because generosity without conversation can feel like leverage. She stared at the number on the screen. He hadn't called, hadn't discussed it, hadn't asked. He had simply acted. And while part of her knew he meant well, another part felt something else rising quietly. Control. She locked her phone and set it down on the nightstand. Across the room, the apartment felt quieter than before, and in that silence, doubt crept in where confidence had been standing just hours earlier. Not doubt about Agnes loving her father, but doubt about whether love and power could coexist peacefully under the same roof of co-parenting. The doorbell didn't ring. No dramatic interruption came. Just the steady tick of the clock on the wall and the reality of a bank transfer that changed the temperature of everything. Because sometimes help doesn't feel like help. Sometimes it feels like a reminder of who has more. And Doris wasn't sure yet which version this was. Logan didn't expect her to come over that night. He had just finished reviewing a draft of the legitimation petition when his phone lit up with Doris's name. He answered immediately. "Everything okay?" he asked. "We need to talk," she said. Her tone wasn't loud. It was level. That worried him more. "I can come by," he offered. "No," she replied. "I'm downstairs." He stood up instantly. When he opened the door to his condo building's lobby a few minutes later, Doris stood near the seating area beneath a tall modern chandelier. She wasn't dressed for confrontation. Jeans, flats, a light sweater. But her eyes were steady. "You transferred money," she said without greeting. "Yes." "You didn't call first." "I saw the hospital paperwork," he answered calmly. "I'm her father. That's my responsibility." Doris crossed her arms lightly. Not defensive. Protective. "You don't get to buy 3 years. The words landed sharp. Logan blinked once. "That's not what I'm doing." "Then what are you doing?" "Helping without a conversation?" He exhaled slowly. In his world, money solved problems quickly. It was efficient, immediate, clean. But this wasn't a quarterly deficit. It was history. "I wasn't trying to bypass you," he said carefully. "I was trying to handle what needed handling." "She's not a transaction," Doris replied. "I know that. Do you?" The lobby was quiet, except for the faint hum of an elevator ascending somewhere above them. Logan stepped closer but kept his tone controlled. "I'm trying to do right." Doris held his gaze. Doing right would have been being there. The truth in that sentence didn't need volume. He swallowed once. "You think I didn't try?" She frowned slightly. "What?" "I came back." The word surprised even him. "You left," she said. "No," he corrected quietly. "You stopped answering." Her brow tightened. "That's not how I remember it. After that night we argued about the conference call. I called you the next day," he continued. "And the day after. Your number went straight to voicemail. I changed my number because you weren't answering mine. I was traveling. You didn't say that. I thought you knew." They stared at each other, both realizing something uncomfortable at the same time. Memory isn't neutral. It edits to protect pride. "I came by your old apartment," Logan said, "the one near the Beltline. The landlord told me you moved." Doris felt her heartbeat shift slightly. "You never told me that. You never gave me the chance." Silence filled the space between them again. But this time it wasn't about custody or money. It was about misalignment. Two people standing in the same past, but remembering different versions of it. "I found out you'd left through a mutual friend," he continued quietly. "I assumed you were done." "I was hurt," she replied. "You kept choosing work. I was building something, and I was building boundaries." The tension wasn't explosive. It was layered, because neither of them had lied. They had just interpreted silence differently. "You think I walked away easily?" he asked. "I think you prioritized what felt urgent," she said. "And you think I wouldn't have shown up if I knew about Agnes?" She hesitated. That hesitation answered more than words could. He stepped back slightly, absorbing that. "I didn't know," he said again. But this time it wasn't offensive. It was regretful. Doris looked down at her hands. "And I didn't know you came back." That truth shifted something, because the narrative they had both held for 3 years, that one had abandoned the other, no longer stood alone. There had been missed calls, changed numbers, unspoken assumptions. Two people protecting their own hurt. Logan ran a hand across his jaw slowly. "I'm not trying to buy time," he said quietly. "I'm trying to show up now." She looked at him again. "Showing up isn't about money." "I know." "Then don't make it about that." He nodded once. "Fair." They stood there in the modern lobby. Glass walls, polished floors, soft lighting reflecting off surfaces designed for status. And for the first time since the voicemail, The tension between them wasn't about Agnes's future. It was about their past. Doris inhaled slowly. I kept her from you, she admitted softly, because I thought you chose something else, and I let my pride keep me from chasing harder, he replied. There it was, the cost of pride. Not dramatic betrayal, not scandal, just distance hardened by ego. Neither fully abandoned the other, neither fully fought for the other either. And somewhere in that middle space, 3 years had passed. Doris looked toward the elevator briefly, then back at him. I don't want to fight you, she said. I don't want to fight either, but we can't pretend it didn't cost something. He nodded. It did. They didn't hug. They didn't resolve everything. They simply stood in the weight of understanding. Sometimes pride tells 2 different stories, and both feel true. The silence in the lobby did not resolve anything. It clarified it. Logan and Doris parted that night without anger, but without comfort either. They understood something new about their past, yet the present still required structure. 2 days later, Logan sat at his office desk reviewing documents. Not acquisition contracts, not investor memos, family court forms. The word legitimation appeared at the top of the page. He read each line carefully. Petition for legitimation establishes legal recognition of fatherhood and allows the father to seek custodial rights. The court evaluates best interest of the child. He paused at that phrase. Best interest. Not wealth, not pride, not retaliation. Best interest. He picked up his phone and called Doris. I'm filing, he said plainly when she answered. For custody? She asked, voice tightening slightly. No. Silence. For legitimation, he clarified. So I can legally stand beside you in decisions, not against you. She didn't respond immediately. I'm requesting a shared parenting plan, he continued. Primary residence remains with you. Her breath shifted slightly on the other end of the line. That's not what I expected. I know. And he did. Most people with his resources would push harder. Lawyers would advise asserting maximum leverage early. Establish authority before compromise. But authority wasn't the goal. Presence was. I don't want to uproot her, he said. Her school, her routines, her community. That matters. Doris sat down slowly at her kitchen table while listening. You're serious? Yes. I thought you'd fight for more. I'm fighting for stability, he replied calmly. Not ownership. The distinction landed. There was no grand speech, no dramatic music swelling behind the decision, just paperwork chosen carefully. I'll need consistent visitation, he added. Weekends, 1 evening during the week, shared holidays. That's reasonable, she said quietly. The fact that she used that word, reasonable, felt like a step forward. Later that afternoon, Logan stood in line at the courthouse, not in a suit, in simple clothes, holding a manila folder instead of a leather briefcase. He observed the space around him. Families waiting quietly, parents holding toddlers, clerks processing files without emotion. Family court didn't look like television drama. It looked like paperwork and responsibility. When his number was called, he stepped forward and handed over the documents. Petition for legitimation, he said clearly. The clerk reviewed the forms and stamped them. It was done, not final, but in motion. He stepped outside into the Atlanta sunlight and paused on the courthouse steps. He didn't feel victorious. He felt grounded. Choosing cooperation in a system built for conflict isn't weakness. It's discipline. He texted Doris a photo of the filed paperwork. Primary residence listed as yours. 3 dots appeared quickly this time. Thank you, she replied. Just that. 2 words, but they carried more weight than any courtroom win could have. That evening, when Logan arrived for his scheduled evening visit, Doris opened the door with less guarded posture than before. You filed, she said. I did. For shared parenting. Yes. She studied him carefully. Why? He didn't overcomplicate it. Because Agnes deserves both of us steady, not competing. She nodded slowly. Reward doesn't always come in applause. Sometimes it comes in lowered defenses. Agnes ran toward him from the hallway. You coming to my school one day? She asked eagerly. Yes, he answered without hesitation. Doris noticed something subtle in that moment. He didn't ask permission. He assumed participation, not control, not dominance, participation. And that assumption felt different from before. Later that night, after Agnes fell asleep and Logan prepared to leave, Doris walked him to the door. "I didn't expect cooperation," she admitted quietly. "Most people don't," he said with a faint, self-aware smile. "You surprise me. I'm learning." She held his gaze for a moment longer than necessary. The fight for stability wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was paperwork, chosen with restraint, and for the first time since the voicemail, the future felt less like a battlefield and more like a blueprint. The progress didn't last quietly, because growth rarely moves in a straight line. It was a Thursday evening when Doris noticed Agnes wasn't finishing her dinner. The same cornbread she usually broke apart with excitement sat mostly untouched on her plate. "You not hungry?" Doris asked gently. Agnes shrugged. "I'm sleepy." Doris placed her palm against her daughter's forehead. "Warm, too warm." She reached for the thermometer from the kitchen drawer and checked twice just to be sure. "Fever, not extreme, but enough to stir concern." She texted Logan. "She's running a fever." He responded within seconds. "Do you need me there?" Doris hesitated. 3 weeks ago, that question would have irritated her. Now it steadied her. "Yes." Logan arrived 20 minutes later, slightly out of breath as if he had rushed without realizing it. He didn't come in with instructions. He didn't come in with solutions. He came in ready. Agnes lay curled on the couch, blanket tucked beneath her chin. "Hey, superstar," he said softly, kneeling beside her. She blinked slowly. "I don't feel good." "I know." Doris stood nearby, arms folded loosely. "We should take her in," she said. "Let's go," Logan replied immediately. No debate, no ego. The drive to the hospital felt different from the first time Agnes had been admitted weeks earlier. Back then, Doris had been alone, scanning paperwork, fielding insurance questions, holding fear privately. Tonight, Logan drove while Doris sat in the back seat beside Agnes, holding her hand. The city lights blurred softly past the windows. Traffic moved steadily along the main roads. Somewhere in the distance, music from a passing car floated briefly through the air before fading again. When they arrived, the hospital entrance looked sterile, but not frightening. Nurses moved efficiently. Parents filled out forms. This time, when paperwork was handed across the counter, Doris didn't hesitate. She passed it to Logan. He filled out the insurance section without commentary. Small acts build trust faster than promises. They sat side by side in the waiting area, not across from each other, side by side. Logan's knee bounced slightly, nervous energy he couldn't disguise. Doris noticed, but didn't comment. Agnes leaned against both of them at once, her small body bridging the space that once felt divided. Minutes passed. No arguments, no tension. Just shared concern. "Remember when she found that photo?" Doris said quietly, not looking at him. He nodded. "Yeah. I was terrified." "Of what?" "That you'd take over." He exhaled softly. "I was terrified you'd shut me out." They both stared ahead at the television mounted on the wall playing muted news coverage. Fear rarely announces itself loudly. It hides inside assumptions. A nurse called Agnes's name. They both stood at the same time. Inside the examination room, Agnes sat on the bed while a nurse checked her vitals. Nothing severe. A viral infection likely. Rest. Fluids. Monitoring. No emergency. But vulnerability has a way of softening pride. Logan stood on one side of the bed. Doris stood on the other. Their hands both rested lightly on Agnes's blanket. No one moved them away. When the nurse left, Agnes looked between them with sleepy eyes. "Don't fight no more," she whispered. The words were barely audible, but they hit harder than any courtroom statement. Logan swallowed first. "We're not fighting," he said gently. Doris nodded. "We're learning." Agnes seemed satisfied with that. She closed her eyes briefly. In that small hospital room, the contrast between their worlds dissolved. There were no high-rise views, no modest apartment walls, no financial differences, just two parents standing beside the same child. Cultural differences, black Southern upbringing, white corporate life, felt less like separation and more like shared layers of the same city. Atlanta doesn't divide as neatly as people assume. It overlaps. Logan glanced at Doris. "Thank you for calling me." "I almost didn't," she admitted. "I'm glad you did." The nurse returned with discharge instructions. Rest, hydration, follow-up if needed. They walked out together, Logan carrying Agnes this time. She rested her head against his shoulder, breathing evenly now. Doris walked beside him without tension. When they reached the parking lot, she paused. "I'm not used to this," she said quietly. "Neither am I," he admitted. "But it felt right." He nodded. Because in moments of shared vulnerability, structure becomes secondary to instinct. They drove back in the same arrangement, Logan driving, Doris beside Agnes in the back. No one spoke much. There was nothing to argue about. Sometimes the most powerful shift isn't loud reconciliation. It's mutual presence in a moment that could have divided you, but didn't. As they pulled into Doris's apartment complex, Agnes stirred slightly. "You both coming?" she murmured. "Yes," they answered at the same time. And for the first time, it didn't feel like coincidence. The emotional peak wasn't dramatic. It was quiet alignment. And quiet alignment builds something stronger than force ever could. The official court date never turned into a battle. It turned into a room. Small, neutral, a rectangular table in the center, soft beige walls, a window that faced a parking lot instead of a skyline. No dramatic spectators, no raised voices echoing through marble corridors. Just structure. Logan arrived first, folder in hand, not thick with demands, organized with proposals. He didn't pace. He didn't rehearse. He sat upright, steady. A few minutes later, Doris walked in. She carried no visible tension, only awareness. She wore a simple navy dress and flat shoes, practical, composed. When she sat across from him, their eyes met briefly. Not adversarial, measured. The mediator, unnamed, neutral, explained the process in a calm tone. "This is about best interest," the mediator said. "Not winning." The phrase felt familiar now. Logan nodded once. Doris nodded too. The paperwork sat between them. Legitimation had been filed. Paternity confirmed. Now the parenting plan needed detail. Schedules, holidays, decision-making authority. The mediator looked at Logan first. "What are you requesting?" Logan spoke clearly, without theatrics. "I want shared decision-making in education and healthcare, consistent visitation, weekends and one weekday evening. I am not requesting primary physical custody." Doris's eyes flickered up at that, not because she hadn't heard it before, but because hearing it formally mattered. The mediator turned to Doris. "Do you object?" She shook her head slowly. "No, I want primary residence to remain with me. Her routines are here, her preschool, her community." "That is reasonable," the mediator replied. Logan added gently, "I agree." The words did not sting. They grounded. They worked through specifics, exchange times, shared calendar access, medical notifications. Logan offered to cover healthcare fully. Doris agreed, with documentation transparency. He offered a college savings account. She agreed, provided it remained in Agnes's name, not tied to control. Each point felt less like negotiation and more like building scaffolding. At one point, the mediator asked a question that shifted the room. "Are both of you willing to encourage Agnes's relationship with the other parent?" Doris answered first. "Yes." Logan answered second. "Yes." No hesitation, because pride had already cost enough. When the final draft of the parenting plan was printed, it felt surprisingly simple. Primary home, Doris. Shared legal decision-making. Consistent visitation. No hostile clauses. No surveillance language. Just structure built on cooperation. Logan signed first. Doris signed second. The mediator collected the documents and nodded. "This is mature," the mediator said quietly. Neither of them smiled widely, but something inside both of them loosened. Outside the courthouse, Atlanta carried on as usual. Traffic moving, people walking briskly to lunch meetings, vendors selling bottled water near the sidewalk. No one knew something significant had just occurred in a beige room upstairs. No dramatic courtroom victory. No applause, just agreement. That Sunday, Logan did something unexpected. He accepted an invitation. Doris had mentioned earlier in the week that her family typically gathered on Sundays for dinner. Neighbors, cousins, church friends drifting in and out. Nothing formal, just food and conversation. "You can come," she had said casually, almost testing the idea. Now he stood outside her apartment holding a small box of pastries from a local bakery in Buckhead. Not extravagant, just thoughtful. When Doris opened the door, The smell of fried chicken and collard greens greeted him instantly. Inside, laughter filled the room. Music played softly, not loud enough to dominate, just enough to color the background. Agnes ran toward him. "You came to Sunday dinner?" she exclaimed proudly. "I did," he replied. He stepped inside. The apartment felt fuller than before. Warm, lived in, real. He wasn't introduced as an outsider. He wasn't paraded as a trophy either. He simply existed there, present. He sat at the small dining table squeezed between neighbors and listened more than he spoke. Someone passed him sweet tea. Someone else joked about the falcon season. At one point, Agnes climbed into his lap without asking. He didn't stiffen this time. He adjusted naturally. Doris watched from across the table. Not suspicious, observant. There's a difference. Later that evening, after plates were cleared and conversation softened into quiet pockets, Logan stepped onto the small balcony for a moment of air. Doris joined him. "You handled today well," she said. "So did you." She leaned lightly against the railing. "I thought I'd feel like I lost something," she admitted. "But I don't. Neither do I. Because cooperation doesn't feel like defeat. It feels like alignment." Inside, Agnes's laughter echoed faintly. The city beyond their building wasn't divided tonight into wealthy and modest neighborhoods. It was simply Atlanta, layered, overlapping, alive. Logan glanced at Doris. What matters more, winning or healing? The question hung there between them, and this time, neither of them needed to answer out loud. The first week after mediation felt almost fragile, not unstable, just new. Logan arrived at Doris's apartment at 7:15 a.m., sharp on his scheduled Wednesday morning for school drop-off. He didn't text that he was outside. He knocked. Doris opened the door with Agnes already dressed in a bright blue shirt and tiny sneakers. She insisted on picking her own outfit. Doris said lightly. "It matches," Logan replied, kneeling down. "Very stylish." Agnes grinned. "You late," she announced. Logan checked his watch. 7:15. "You still late," she insisted. He laughed softly. "I'll work on that." Children redefine punctuality based on excitement. The drive to preschool wasn't dramatic. No swelling music. Just Atlanta morning traffic moving steadily past storefronts and bus stops. Logan turned the radio low until Agnes reached forward. "No." "Music loud." He raised the volume. Hip-hop filled the car. Not aggressive, just rhythmic. A beat that carried Atlanta's pulse through speakers. Agnes bobbed her head proudly. "You know this song?" she asked. "I do now," he said. At a red light near the Beltline entrance, she pointed toward the walking trail. "We walk there?" "Yes," he promised. "Saturday." Consistency begins with small, kept promises. At drop-off, Agnes didn't cling. She hugged him once and ran toward the classroom. He stood there a second longer than necessary, watching her settle in. He wasn't hovering. He was imprinting the moment. Later that Saturday, he kept his word. They met near the Beltline under clear skies. Families walked dogs. Cyclists passed with bells chiming gently. Street art colored the concrete walls nearby. Agnes insisted on holding both their hands at once. They walked slowly. "Why you walk so fast?" she asked Logan. "I don't know. Walk slow." He adjusted. Slower pace. Children don't live in quarterly projections. They live in steps. They stopped near a small vendor cart where Logan bought lemonade for Agnes and unsweet tea for himself. "You don't like sweet tea?" she asked, confused. "I'm learning," he replied. She nodded approvingly. Trust doesn't build in declarations. It builds in repetition. Another Wednesday, another drop-off, another Saturday walk, another evening dinner. Logan began keeping a small basket of toys in his condo, nothing extravagant. Coloring books, building blocks, a stuffed animal she picked herself during a trip to a neighborhood store. "You got toys now," Agnes said proudly. "I do." She walked into his condo like she belonged there now. Less awe at the height, more comfort in the couch. One afternoon, Doris texted him during his scheduled visitation. She needs her hair redone before school tomorrow. Logan stared at the message. Hair. He had never braided hair before. He drove Agnes back to Doris's apartment early that evening. "I can't braid," he admitted. Doris raised an eyebrow. "Then you're about to learn." She sat at the kitchen table and handed him a comb and hair ties. "Simple ponytail first. Agnes sat patiently between them, swinging her legs. Logan moved cautiously. Too tight at first. Not like you tying a necktie, Doris corrected gently. He loosened his grip. Agnes giggled. You pulling. I'm sorry, he murmured. He tried again. Slower, more careful. Doris watched quietly, not criticizing, observing. When he finally secured the ponytail successfully, Agnes jumped up and ran to the mirror. It looked good, she declared. Logan looked relieved. Doris smiled faintly. See, not everything is a boardroom. He smirked. I'm figuring that out. Moments like that didn't trend online. They didn't earn applause, but they stitched something durable. Weeks passed. School drop-offs became routine. Beltline walks turned into predictable Saturdays. Logan began attending occasional preschool events, art displays taped to classroom walls, small performances where children sang slightly off-key but confidently. He clapped louder than necessary. Doris noticed. He didn't miss a visitation, not once. Consistency reshaped perception. One evening after dinner, Agnes fell asleep on the couch at Logan's condo. He didn't wake her immediately. He sat there quietly, studying her peaceful expression. No fear, no confusion, just security. He carried her gently to the guest bedroom he had converted into her space. Soft sheets, nightlight glowing faintly, a framed drawing she made taped beside the bed. He stood there for a moment before leaving the room. Provision had once been his language. Now participation was, and in the slow repetition of school mornings, car rides filled with music, beltline steps under open sky, and uneven ponytails that got better each week, trust had stopped feeling fragile. It felt earned. It wasn't planned. That's what made it honest. Agnes had fallen asleep early that Friday night after an afternoon at the park. She was sprawled sideways across Doris's couch, one sneaker half off, a children's book still open near her hand. Logan stood near the doorway, jacket in his hands. I can carry her to the bedroom, he offered. I've got it, Doris replied softly. He nodded. He didn't rush out this time. He waited. There was something different in the air, not tension, not uncertainty, just space, the kind of quiet that invites truth if you're brave enough to let it. When Doris returned from tucking Agnes in, she didn't immediately walk him to the door. Instead, she stepped onto the small porch outside her apartment. The night air was warm, carrying faint sounds of traffic and distant laughter from somewhere down the block. A porch light cast a gentle glow around them. Logan followed her out. For a moment, they stood side by side, looking at nothing in particular. You've been consistent, Doris said quietly. I said I would be. Yes, you did. Silence lingered, not heavy, not strained, just thoughtful. She folded her arms lightly across her chest, not defensively, but protectively. That posture had lived in her body for years. I need to tell you something, she said. He turned slightly toward her. When I found out I was pregnant, I told myself you wouldn't slow down for us, she admitted. You were building something big, and I didn't want to beg someone to choose me. He listened without interrupting. I convinced myself that silence was safer, she continued. If you didn't know, you couldn't reject us. The honesty was steady, not emotional, but it carried weight. I wasn't trying to hurt you, she added. I know, he said softly. No, you don't, she replied gently. I was afraid, not just of losing you, of losing control. He absorbed that. Control? He asked carefully. I grew up watching women get pushed aside when men with money showed up. Decisions shifted, homes shifted, power shifted. I didn't want that for Agnes, or for me. That fear had shaped 3 years. Logan exhaled slowly. I hid behind ambition, he admitted. She glanced at him. What do you mean? I told myself I was building security, he said, that if I worked hard enough, I'd never fail anyone. But the truth is, I was afraid of failing as a partner. Her eyes softened slightly. I didn't know how to slow down, he continued. Every time things got serious, I leaned into work instead. It felt measurable, predictable. Relationships don't come with spreadsheets. A faint smile touched her lips at that. He wasn't joking. He was confessing. I wasn't ready, he said quietly. And I didn't know how to say that without sounding weak. You wouldn't have sounded weak, she replied. I thought I would. They stood in that truth. 2 people who had been younger then, less self-aware, more defensive. You think we would have made it? She asked suddenly. The question wasn't accusatory. It was reflective. He considered it carefully. I don't know, he answered honestly. Back then? Maybe not. We were both guarding something. She nodded slowly. And now? He hesitated. Because this wasn't about nostalgia. It was about possibility. Now I think we're less afraid, he said. The porch light flickered briefly in the warm air. Doris looked out toward the quiet street below. I still love you, she said finally. The words didn't rush out. They landed gently. Not dramatic, not desperate. Just true. Logan didn't flinch. He didn't step closer impulsively. He let the statement exist. I never stopped caring about you, he replied. Even when I was angry. She turned toward him fully now. This isn't about rushing back into something, she clarified. I know. It's about honesty. He nodded. And healing, he added. They didn't move toward each other. They didn't blur boundaries. They stood there, close enough to feel warmth, far enough to respect space. Agnes doesn't need us to be perfect, Doris said. She needs us to be steady. I can be steady, he replied. I see that. The night air carried the scent of someone grilling nearby. A car passed slowly down the street. Life continued in ordinary rhythm around them. Logan leaned slightly against the railing. I don't want to replace the past, he said. I want to build forward. She studied him carefully. You've changed. So have you. That acknowledgement felt earned, not assumed. They stood quietly a moment longer. No grand embrace, no impulsive kiss, just proximity shaped by maturity. When he finally stepped back toward the door, Doris followed. Good night, Logan. Good night, Doris. The door closed gently. And for the first time since the voicemail months ago, the emotional distance between them felt shorter than the physical space. Not erased. Shorter. Sometimes confession isn't about reigniting what was lost. It's about clearing the ground for something healthier to grow. Time did not rush. It settled. Weeks turned into months, not in dramatic leaps, but in layered, ordinary moments. School mornings, shared calendars, prescribed cough syrup measured carefully during minor colds, belt-lined Saturdays that turned into tradition, Sunday dinners where Logan no longer felt like a guest. Stability doesn't arrive with a spotlight. It arrives quietly and stays if you treat it right. One Tuesday morning, nearly a year after the first voicemail, Logan stood in his kitchen again. Same marble counters, same skyline, different man. He wasn't pouring bourbon. He was flipping pancakes, carefully, one slightly too brown, one perfect, one shaped accidentally like a crooked heart. His phone buzzed on the counter. Unknown number. He froze for half a second. Old memory reflex. Then he smiled. He answered immediately. Before he could speak, a familiar voice came through. Older now, clearer, less hesitant. Daddy, don't forget you promised pancakes. He laughed, a full, unguarded sound. I'm already making them, he said. You better not burn them again, Agnes teased. He glanced down at the slightly darker one. No promises. The line crackled faintly as she giggled. Doris's voice appeared briefly in the background. Tell him we're 5 minutes away. Agnes returned to the phone. We almost there? I'll have syrup ready. He ended the call slowly, staring at the screen for a moment longer than necessary. Unknown number. The same category that once carried fear now carried familiarity. The doorbell rang shortly after. He opened it to see Doris holding Agnes's hand, both dressed casually for the morning. Agnes rushed inside without hesitation. I smell pancakes. You do, he replied. She ran toward the kitchen. Doris stepped inside more slowly, watching him with an expression that wasn't guarded anymore. Just aware. He plated the pancakes carefully, adding sliced strawberries on top. Agnes climbed into her seat at the island. Remember when you didn't know how to braid? She asked suddenly between bites. He smirked. I know how now. Not perfect, she corrected. Working on it, he said. Doris laughed softly. It wasn't forced. It wasn't cautious. It was natural. After breakfast, Agnes ran toward the living room to gather her small backpack. Logan wiped his hands on a towel and looked at Doris. That voicemail changed everything, he said quietly. She nodded. It didn't just change you, she replied. It changed us. Outside, the city moved like it always had. Traffic humming, MARTA trains sliding along tracks, neighborhoods layered in contrast and connection. But inside that high-rise kitchen, nothing felt distant anymore. Logan walked toward the window out of habit, then stopped himself and turned back toward the room instead. Presence over perspective. Agnes tugged at his hand. "Come on, Daddy." The word no longer startled him. It fit. As they prepared to leave for the park, a new Tuesday tradition, Logan felt something settle in his chest that ambition had never delivered. Peace, not because everything was perfect, but because everything was honest. Life comes full circle, but only for those who chase healing, not revenge. He picked up his phone before heading out and glanced at the voicemail notification still sitting there from earlier. He saved it, not because he feared losing it, but because it marked distance traveled. At the park later that morning, Agnes ran ahead toward the swings while Logan and Doris followed side by side. They didn't hold hands. They didn't need to. They moved in the same direction. Agnes climbed onto the swing and looked back at them. "Push me." Logan stepped forward first, giving a gentle push. "Higher, higher." She laughed, fearless. Doris watched, sunlight catching her face. "What does love look like?" Logan said softly, almost to himself, "when it finally stops running." Doris didn't answer immediately. She stepped closer. "It looks like showing up," she replied. The swing moved steadily. Forward, back, forward, back. No chaos, no collision, just rhythm. Logan stood there watching his daughter arc against the Atlanta sky, feeling the weight of that first voicemail dissolve into something entirely different. Gratitude. And if this story touched you, if you've ever ignored a call, doubted a second chance, or wondered whether healing could outgrow pride, remember this: sometimes the unknown number isn't a disruption. It's an invitation. If this story touched you, subscribe to Mr. Dave Stories, where every story teaches, touches, and transforms. Now, I'll leave you with one question. What does love look like when it finally stops running?